All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. Next up is Steve Horn. He's a research fellow for DeSmogBlog and freelance investigative journalist based out of Madison, Wisconsin. He's got a piece at the Anti-War blog, antiwar.com/blog. Here's another one for Truth Out. He's covering the story of the NATO 3, now the NATO 6?
The NATO 6, yep.
All right, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, how laughable is this whole thing? I don't know. Where should we start here? 6 people have been arrested on terrorism charges, right? State terrorism charges or federal ones? State, right?
State terrorism charges, although so 5 of them have been charged with these terrorism charges. One of them was charged with aggravated battery of a Chicago police officer. Although they were state terrorism charges, they were. It was obvious from reading the court reports that it was part of a federal plot, sort of, or at least a federal investigation of some sort, corroborated by the United States Secret Service and the FBI. So although it's at a state level right now, there's no saying where this will end up down the road, especially since the FBI was involved in the plot for sure.
So, in other words, the informants were FBI informants rather than state police informants?
Exactly, yeah.
Uh-huh. And then, so now, we've covered entrapment on terrorism charges on this show for a long, long time. Of course, usually it's Muslims entrapped, but they get to a certain point where the cop says, now you sure you don't want to back out or something, and they cross the line from entrapment into they're really guilty of something, I guess, you know. And has that happened here, or is this just straight ridiculousness, or what? Because I just have trouble going in. I just have trouble believing that a bunch of hippies protesting a NATO meeting mean to harm anyone at all. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I had heard that at least the original 3 that were referred to as the NATO 3, those 3 were pretty suspicious, in some ways, of a lot of the police. I mean, they had been approached by police before, asked what they were up to they were actually stopped in their car at one point earlier in the week, or a week before, or something like that. They weren't willing to give over much information, so I think that the police and the federal, the FBI, whoever else was involved, were feeling them out to see what would be necessary to stop them. It's very clear, like you said. I mean, you refer to them as hippies, but they were just young kids generally. I mean, between the ages of 20 and 27. One of them still in college. Who, I mean, they were like, I guess some of them may have referred. Some of them, I don't even think any of them refer to themselves as anarchists. But all it really meant is that a lot of them have, at least in Chicago, they lived in this collective house where they, ate vegan food, and some of them were part of Occupy Chicago, and some of the other people came in to visit them for a place to stay because none of these kids have a lot of money. But it's very obvious that this was looking at the evidence objectively, that it seems like such a farce, and it reminds me a lot of, in a lot of ways, like some of the evidence they're using in terms of saying that they had swords and shields and brass knuckles and stars. It reminds me a lot of the 2010 flotilla event that happened when these activists were trying to bring materials to people in Gaza. It's the evidence that the IDF was making up that was just such a farce. It reminds me of that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were trying to invade Israel and attack with sticks, I remember.
Right, exactly.
In league with Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda at the same time. How do you keep them apart? I don't know.
Exactly. So, I mean, that was one of the first things that came to mind for a while. All right,
now, wait a minute. Now, somebody said here, the cops assert that, but there was Molotov cocktails were being made, and at least one report I read, I forget if it was the Chicago Tribune or something, I think had the defense lawyers saying that may be true, but it was the cops who brought them. It wasn't, and apparently they didn't, convince anybody else to help them do anything with this stuff. Is that your understanding? Do I have that right?
Yeah, at best, the most sort of, I mean, if you want to say that the best evidence that the prosecutors have is that evidence was there at some point in time. But, the facts are clear that there were 2 informants. There were 9 people arrested. There were 11 people originally in the house. The 2 of them were informants. There's a picture of one of them that's public now that the National Lawyers Guild of Chicago has made public. That's in the story I just wrote for Truth Out. That one of the, so, at best that evidence was planted by these informants. At the worst, it wasn't even ever there, because what happened was, the next day or that night, the police or whatever agents were there destroyed all the evidence, and the apartment, there's pictures of it that were taken by the National Lawyers Guild of Chicago, is ransacked. So there's no way to even, all it is in the court records, it says that they found this stuff, but they don't have any actual hard evidence of these materials that they say that were being used to create Molotov cocktails. What they do have is a picture that the national, I don't remember who gave this picture to whom and how it was made public, but there's a picture of a beer-making canister of some sort that was used to make beer, that I guess is being said that they were being used to make Molotov cocktails, but there's no evidence of that. Like I was saying before, these are people who ate organic food and, vegan types, and that's just kind of what they do. They make their own beer. It's not that bizarre of a thing to imagine that they would do that. So that's the only evidence, that's the quote evidence that they say they have beyond the other stuff that was destroyed, and who knows where it is right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, so what was the big development that made them go out and arrest 3 more? Because they had already let a bunch of guys go, right? Was it they went and rearrested some people, or they went and found 3 more they wanted to go after?
So it's a little complex, the situation. So they originally, so what was referred to as the NATO 3 was originally 9 that were taken preemptively on Wednesday evening at 11:45 p.m. Central Time. Of those 9, there are 3 who actually who received terrorism charges on Saturday. So then, thereafter, yesterday, on Sunday, there was a news report, probably one of the Chicago local papers reported it first, that there were 2 more, quote, terrorist charges that had even less evidence than what I just discussed before. One of them, the police say, and it's what I've heard from the National Lawyers Guild, Chicago attorneys, is that it's the same 2 informants that that were used, that they've corroborated from talking to various sources. But so one of these guys was the only evidence they have is that, and when I say evidence, I say that with quotes, is that this guy was talking to friends in a forest preserve in or around Chicago, and he said, at some point he said that he wanted to get materials for PVC materials to create for pipes. And they're saying that those were going to be used to make a pipe bomb. So that's one of them. The other guy is also, these 2 are both Chicago-based activists. The other guy, a little younger, so the first one's 28, the other one's 24. They say that he was getting explosives to be packed into, get this, a Harry Potter book that would be used to, I didn't say how he was going to use it, but apparently to make a bomb to use at the NATO summit. But the crazy thing about these 2 guys, the first one I just mentioned, they never even searched his home. They picked him up out of a restaurant. The second guy, they searched his home and didn't find anything. So they didn't even find what they said, that even if they said those things, it's legal to say those things under the First Amendment.
All right, now,
crazy.
Well, I just have to hold it right here. We got a hard break. Okay. We'll be right back, everybody, with Steve Horn. He's writing at antiwar.com/blog and at Truth Out about the NATO 3. It's now the NATO 6. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. So we're on the phone with Steve Horn from truthout.org. DeSmogBlog is really where he calls home. Here he is also writing at truthout.org. At antiwar.com, it's 3 Chicago NATO Summit activists charged with conspiracy to commit terrorism and providing material support for terrorism. And then here, more NATO Summit activists charged, 5 linked by 2 informants at Truthout. And the truth comes out, and it's just as you could have predicted. The whole thing was drummed up by a bunch of job holders calling themselves our security force. And I guess this picture here that you have, Steve, is of a cop goose-stepping another cop, a pretended hippie, the guy who set up the other hippies. Is that right?
Yep. And I just wonder what the heck was going through that the real cop's mind, who was taking him and walking him to the car. I just wonder. I wonder if she knew. I wonder the depth to which the Chicago Police Department knew of what the heck was happening versus, I'm sure there was really close collaboration between.
Yeah, they must have told them because, you send in local cops in a situation, they might be scared of a guy like that and shoot him to death. You know how cops are. They got to be warned that, hey, don't shoot everybody to death. Some of them work for us.
Exactly, and it looks pretty sketchy. If you look at the picture of the informant, you can see he's being walked away in a separate direction. That's sort of in the background of the picture is all the other 9 who are being jam-packed into a squad car, too. So, yeah, I'm sure she knew, but it's a pretty, I mean, in some ways it shouldn't be, but it's somewhat an amusing picture to take a look at.
Well, even if they're idiots or something, usually when the FBI, successfully entraps somebody into some kind of terrorist plot, you gotta give the feds some credit that at least they ought to convict these people of complete stupidity, as criminal stupidity, like these kids that supposedly all gave thumbs up to the plan to blow up the bridge and whatever. Look, obviously they were set up, but they let themselves be set up this way. In this case, though, it sounds like some of these people were just wrong place, wrong time. The one guy hitchhiked in or something, and so he was in the car with somebody else who knew somebody, something like that. Is that really? He's one of the 6 charged?
It's pretty crazy. It sounds like there is a pretty big difference. There are important similarities. There's pretty big differences between the Cleveland 6, I think the Cleveland 5 that you referred to, who were extremely susceptible towards something like this happening, seemingly extremely clueless about how this stuff works, and just so easily duped that it's almost just a tragedy to hear how it happened. But in the case of the Chicago people, it seems like they were a little smarter, like I said, and that's why the evidence just had to be planted in the home as opposed to bringing those people to a bridge. It didn't work quite as well with them. But going back to wrong place, wrong time, like you said, one of the guys who was arrested of the 9, might have been 2, 1 or 2 of them was like you said, he hitchhiked in from the East Coast, I think New York or no, I'm not sure, but he was actually arrested at a CVS. So he wasn't even in the house. He was going to a CVS to buy some beer, I guess, for his friends, or for the people that were housing him while he was there. And I spoke with him, and I mean, it sounds like I mean, he didn't even know he didn't really know anything that was happening there. He didn't even know how he was how and why he was being arrested at a CVS. So it's pretty crazy. I mean, and he was held from a Wednesday at 11:45 around midnight all the way through a Friday, and then he was released without ever being told Friday evening, late, what his charges were. So almost 2 full days, almost 48 full hours without even being told why he was being detained at this police station. And I guess at the police station all 9 of them were held in solitary confinement with their legs shackled and one of their arms chained or cuffed to a bench. So they got 2 meals in the 48 hours. So it's pretty heinous. I mean, you could even go so far to say that it was if there was a country that followed the rule of law, it would be torture. solitary confinement. But, the police don't follow the law.
Yeah, well, so certainly they don't in Chicago.
Yeah. So that's the long and short of it.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's a big deal. It's back to, we had this discussion with Greenwald earlier, Glenn Greenwald, about how used to all this we are now. Where like, hey, come on, that sounds like pretty mild torture to say compared to what they're doing to the Somalis in the dungeon beneath Mogadishu right now. You know what I mean?
Right.
But actually, no, that's actually a really big deal. Take somebody, arrest them, hold them without charge. They're not even calling them a material witness or anything. They're just basically locking them in solitary for a few days for trumped up charges at worst. And maybe they're people that end up being turned, loose and released anyway.
Right, exactly. And then, beyond that, there's been just tons of cases of the police here in Chicago just abusing their power in terms of, I know there's one really good example of these three, so I'll tie this into the sixth guy who we haven't talked about that much. He was a guy who did a lot of live casts of action at Occupy Pittsburgh. He came into Chicago, and I know he had his own live cast going here because I looked on his Twitter account. He was, I think that his charges were completely bogus. There's no evidence of it. The MLG said there's no evidence of it. The police officer didn't have to show any signs of being abused, in terms of actual bruises or anything. So there's no evidence. But beyond him, there were three other live cast types of guys whose home was, the police came to their home and said, what are you doing here? What are your intentions here? And interrogated, but so far, and this is just insane, interrogated at gunpoint, then let them go. But it's out of control. And if it's become normalized, then it's a scary sign. But I essentially agree with you because this is not even the story that's being told in anything other than the independent media. That what you're hearing in the mainstream media is that, well, exactly what the police are saying. They have a complete deference to power. So it's that these people were terrorists who had a plot to bomb Rahm Emanuel's house, the mayor of Chicago, the Barack Obama headquarters, the NATO summit. It's just a completely different, made-up story compared to what's really going on in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think another one of the stories here, and this goes for the Ohio thing too, is just how scared they are. And I saw actually you had a piece here where they're bringing in the Pinkerton cops to watch the Occupy Wall Street people in New York, which is hilarious in a certain ironical kind of way. But boy, are they taking the Occupy movement seriously. And I'm sorry, because I just don't. I'd like to, and I do see it as, mostly liberals and principled leftists and progressives who refuse to love the damn Democratic Party, because why should they? And they shouldn't, and that's great. That just goes to show that they've got some principle and whatever, but as far as what are they ever going to actually do about it? Nothing. Right. And I'm not criticizing, because I don't know what to do either. I can't do anything, but I'm just saying, if I was, inside the state, I sure as hell wouldn't be afraid of them. They're just hippies with signs, standing out there doing their chanting and their little chants. So who cares? And yet their conscience is so guilty. They are so they're terrified because they can imagine what the American people ought to be doing to them. You know what I mean? Pitchforks and torches and run them out of town on the rail. Maybe some hot tar and feathers for them. An arson fire here or there. That's what they think is coming. And so they act like it. That's why there's 10,000 cops in a line out there in Chicago during this summit, this NATO summit.
Exactly. That's how, you took the words that I was going to use essentially, is that although the Occupy movement itself is, if you look at the actual numbers, it's pretty small in each city, even in the biggest ones like Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Chicago. But the fact is that they are voicing some things that actually the mainstream agrees with. It's just that the bulk of Americans aren't actually doing anything about it yet, and these people in power who are actually scared of what could be to come. So yeah, you're right, exactly.
Right. I mean, all I'm saying is so far TV ignoring them is working just fine. You know what I mean? It's not like, well, for example, the election in 2012 isn't totally different because the Occupy movement exists or something like that. Just, I don't know. But I think the point is they know they're scum. The people who run the empire, including, you know, Rahm Emanuel and his little empire up there in Chicago and the rest of them.
Oh, they know the best, exactly. They know exactly. They're the ones who are signing contracts with the Pinkertons of the world and these private security firms. And
that's so amazing. You know what? We're already going over time for just a second. Let me keep you just a second. Tell us about the Pinkertons and your new piece. That's at, hang on, I have it right here, nationofchange.org. The Pinkertons head to Occupy Wall Street. No joke, huh?
No joke. The Pinkertons were, although they're not referred to as the Pinkertons today, they actually do have a subsidiary called Pinkerton Government Services, Inc. They're the larger umbrella corporation that owns Pinkerton today is called Securitas AB, which is actually based out of Sweden, although it's an international security firm. What happened with them is Bloomberg News reported at the end of April that in the run-up to the May Day action, the May 1st action planned by Occupy Wall Street and the NATO Summit, which I've been covering in Chicago, Securitas AB / what formerly was known as Pinkerton was employed to track these activists and watch them like, quote, wolves. And they were the elk, kind of. That was the language that this guy at, I think that Pinkerton Government Services, they were the elk fending off the wolves. It's really hard to say what they've actually done here because it's an unaccountable private security firm that no one has any clue what they're up to. But I will say I did see one Securitas agent when I got lunch in Chicago. I saw him standing on a corner. So they're here. They're definitely here, but you don't know exactly where they are and what they're doing, but they've definitely been watching. And their slogan dating back to the 1850s is they are the, quote, private eye. So that's what they do. They do surveillance. They do frontline security. They kind of do it all. And it seems like one of their major clients is the big banks. So that's why the story in Bloomberg packed up, because it was the big banks contracting them for these two activist enclaves, Chicago and New York, in May.
But, you know, if there's a silver lining in there, maybe it's that the banks don't trust the cops to be able to protect them. And that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there, and that who knows, I mean, that could be why both internationally and nationally that everything's become much more privatized in terms of security, because they know they have to pay them more to cover their asses, and then push comes to shove, you know, maybe police will say, oh, well, I identify more with these people that have these grievances, kind of, I mean, not to push this too far because the United States is nowhere close to there, but to what happened in Egypt where, you know, these security forces, domestic ones, the military put down the guns, and that's when Mubarak was ousted. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, for sure, that's a security, it shows what you just said, that they are increasingly desperate. So they realize they have to pay more.
The sad thing is, I think that kind of thing is more likely to happen in Egypt than here now. Again, back to their guilty conscience, though, what they think might happen to them, what could happen to them.
Right. So that's, it was an interesting case, and that was just a stroke of, in some ways, maybe a stroke of luck by Bloomberg to get that story, but I'm sure that it's a lot more widespread than just the Pinkerton Government Services. I'm sure there's lots of companies. I even saw a couple people with shirts on that had different names on them in Chicago. So that's a trend to watch for, is the domestic privatization of these security services.
Yep. All right. Well, we're already over time. I better let you go, but I really appreciate your time on the show. It's been good, Steve.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Everybody, that's Steve Horn. He writes for Nation of Change, DeSmogBlog, truthout.org, and he's got one at the blog at antiwar.com, too, about the Chicago 3, now the Chicago 6, this ridiculous government-generated terrorism plot of anti-NATO protesters.